everybody. Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is word choice when it comes to discussing the topic of abortion. Simple fact of the matter is the words that both ourselves and the pro choice side choose to use can 100% make or break an entire discussion. So, I just have a few examples of some words that you should try to avoid and words that you should use instead that are much more effective. Seem a little silly to get caught up in this, but it is important to stop and think about the effect certain words have, both for us and for the people we're discussing these matters with. There are some words that are inherently going to make people more or less upset. There are some words that can be manipulated. There are some words that can get you caught up in different legalistic or moralistic quandaries when that was not the intention. So being very careful and very strategic about the words we choose to use about this topic go a long way to make sure that the discussion can continue to go in the correct direction. And that correct direction, of course, is making people recognize the importance, the value, and the dignity of human life. Word that is thrown around a lot, pretty much any contemporary moral issue, there seems to be this attempt to tie racism into it. And to me, that is very dangerous. There is actual racism in the world, unfortunately, and we have used and overused the term so much in contemporary society that it no longer has the meaning it was meant to have. Tragically, there is still real racism in the world, but we've used the term so much, so loosely, that it no longer carries the meaning that it should. The word I would use in its place, especially talking about the pro-choice movement, is eugenicist. First of all, as I'm sure a lot of us already know, the modern pro-choice movement was founded by passionate eugenicists, most notably Margaret Sanger, but that's a topic for another video. But second of all, the entire basis of the movement is that personhood has stipulations. The pro-choice movement, a person's only a person if they've already been born. The eugenicist movement, a person is only a person if their head is the right shape and size. So it is a very accurate label for the pro-choice movement, whether they're willing to admit it or not. So instead of calling them racist, call them eugenicist. It fits almost disturbingly well. But if you know the history behind it, well, it's almost supposed to. But again, different conversation for a different video. So don't call them racist, call them eugenicist. And it is true and accurate. Whether or not they'll admit it, that is how they act. About this term that make me want to try to avoid it. First of all, regardless of what side you're on, the word murder elicits a very strong emotional response. And discussing this, we do need to keep it as civil and as calm as possible, because the second anybody starts yelling, the argument is essentially forfeit for both sides, in my opinion. So using a word that is not as hypercharged helps to keep things focused on the actual matter at hand. But the second thing, and something that I have fallen into myself many a time, is the legalistic component of this. Unfortunately, there are legal documents. For example, I believe it is the Rhode Island state constitution, makes an exception that says that abortions, even on-demand elective abortions, are legally justified. So somebody who knows a bit about the law can use that, if you use the term murder, to create a legalistic argument against your stance. The thing about legalistic arguments is that they're very tricky. You have to have a very detailed, very thorough understanding of the law to be able to refute them. So I recommend avoiding it altogether. The word, or the phrase I should say I would use instead, is ending of a human life. Because no matter what they say, at the end of the day, that's what abortion does. It ends a biological human being's life. So instead of getting caught up in the legalese and getting caught up in the emotional ramifications of the term murder, say ending of a human life and keep it as calm and civilized as you can. Try some people, so let me explain. Something that I've observed about not just the modern pro-choice, pro-life discussion, but this ongoing debate we've been having since Roe v. Wade and even before then, is how scientific both sides like to make it seem. It seems like both sides like to create this binary dynamic in the situation when we all know how complex it actually is. And this is just one example. They don't want to talk about children like they're children. They want to talk about them like they're scientific specimens. The second they remove the personhood, the human element from the equation, it's much easier to justify the act of ending a human life. So scientific terms, and even some of the more odd ones like clump of cells, parasite, etc., to me should not be used in this argument. This is a moral argument, and they continually try to bring up scientific and legalistic arguments when we should be focusing on the moral components. What we should be calling them instead of fetuses are persons. Biologically speaking, every human being ever conceived is just that, a human being. It's been proven that from the moment of conception, an unborn child has a unique genetic code. They are a unique individual. Moralistically, religiously speaking, they are created in the image of their creator, and they have the same life, liberty, dignity that every other human being should have in a fair and just society. However, the pro-choice movement doesn't want us to recognize that. They would rather instead whitewash it and act like they're not people, but instead scientific specimens. So the labels they use are specifically designed to do that. So by labeling it as what it is, a genetic person, a biological human being, we are removing the vast majority of their justification. They can only ever justify it when there is a stipulation attached to that personhood, when there is a label attached to that personhood instead of just calling it a person. So as much as possible, I wouldn't even call them babies. I wouldn't even call them zygotes. I would call them people, persons, because biologically, socially, moralistically, that is what they are, regardless of what the pro-choice movement likes people to believe. A really interesting closing thought. This notion of the pro-choice movement wanting people to think a certain way. Because that's really what they do. You look at where their resources go. The vast majority of their resources go towards either expanding or normalizing abortion. It's almost like they don't want people to choose. It's almost like this notion of choice is a bit of an illusion. But that's definitely a conversation for a different video. Definitely take a deep dive into that one of these days. But thank you for watching. Feel free to discuss in the comments. I love having conversations on this topic. I'm very passionate about it, if you can't tell. Of course, be civil and polite. There's no reason to, start throwing around ad hominems or anything like that. But as always, thank you for watching. I hope you guys have a blessed day. And Patty says hi. Can you say hi, Patty? Anyway, have a blessed week.